Hey everybody, Valerie Del Grosso here, your friend who's a lawyer. I am back with the next in our live workshop series this summer. This one is all about using other people's content in your coaching business. We're going to cover a few different ways that this comes up. In fact, many more than a few, including people's content, their coaching methodologies, images, program names, sales page ideas, sales copy, even framing of the issues and pain points of customers. So I want to tell you just a little bit of backstory on this topic. Normally I like to jump right into it, but I think this is important for you to know. I have been working on this rebrand, as I mentioned, and the agency that's doing the rebrand works with a lot of the mega famous people in the coaching industry. That wasn't why I picked them, but it just so happened that that was the case. And so in making having some conversations around what I wanted my brand to be, this topic of people copying came up, and we ended up going on this whole tangent into some of the things that we're seeing in the industry that are really problematic, some of which are intentional, and I'll show you some examples of that, some of which I think are very innocent and still damaging. So I had planned actually to host a workshop in January on this topic and kind of make it more of a roundtable where we could come up with a pledge or some type of agreed upon standard that we would have in the industry on just making sure that what we're selling is very unique, it's our own genius, it's not other people's, so that not only are we committed to the integrity and the value of those ideas, but we're also making sure that coaching clients are not having bad experiences by having to buy expensive programs that just turn out to be regurgitations of someone else's work. So I ended up not doing that in January for a whole lot of reasons I won't get into, but I'm really glad I didn't, because a lot of these same people that I had considered inviting have since kind of been exposed for some of those own practices in their businesses, and I was feeling very out of alignment with them for a lot of reasons in the first place, but especially as it relates to the topic we're going to talk about today. So I instead decided to go to all of you, the audience who knows me, and start the conversation here instead of trying to bring it to anybody else. And I feel so much better about that, and we can accomplish so much more with this. So there are two things that will really guide the conversation today, and I want you to keep these in mind. The first is that you may be seeing a lot of what I'm going to tell you about today happening, and you may be thinking, well, if all these people are doing it, it is probably okay or accepted. And so the first thing to realize is that people are doing a lot of the wrong things and just haven't gotten caught yet. But the second guiding principle we're going to go by today is a rule of thumb that I hope makes your own decisions about what to use in the future very easy. And that is, if you did not create something yourself or buy it for the purpose that you're using it, you can't use it. That's the rule of thumb. If you didn't create it or you didn't pay for it for this purpose, you cannot be using it. So let me give you an example. This is especially pertinent for business coaches. We see this all the time with business coaches. I talk to them all the time about it. So let's say that you are teaching people strategies for automated lead generation, okay, to help minimize cash flow fluctuations and the feast or famine cycle. So you invite other business owners into your program and you teach this methodology. And instead of them just applying it in their own businesses to generate automated lead flow and stop the feast or famine cycle, you deliver such a paradigm shift to some of those clients that instead they co-opt your material and start reteaching it to their own clients. It's a very common thing. We go in programs, we learn something, we turn around and we teach it to other people. But my expectation is that unless you're in some kind of certification program where you learn that material, that what you purchased was a license to view your coach's material and apply it in your own business to create automated lead flow in that example, not to reverse engineer, take pieces out, reteach at all. And it's so common to do that. And I think there's a few reasons behind the scenes. Number one, it's like, well, I paid for it. The information is mine now to do whatever I want with it. And that's a big myth that I'll come back to in a second. The second thing is this thought of like, well, nothing is truly original. And I get that thinking, and I'll help you understand where the line between nothing original and infringement is shortly. There's also an attitude that information should be free, and educational information especially should be shared. And I'm not saying any one of these things is totally problematic, but you have to understand that when it comes to intellectual property, which are things like names and content, it's not a common sense area of law. In fact, it is specifically meant to not be the common sense area of law, because we want to make sure that these ideas are protected for the person who created them. So let's kind of move into this now. It is true that ideas themselves are not protectable. So Darwin's theory of evolution, not protectable. But the expression of the idea is protectable. So you could not rip off the copy from Darwin's book, The Origin of Species, even though it's, the idea of evolution is not protected in and of itself. You could go write your own book about it, but you can't copy or infringe on the book that he's written about it, because that's where he's expressed the idea. Now, that's a fine line, I get it, but if you're in a business coaching program, like the example I was just using, the trend in the law about infringement versus influence is the following. If you're taking information out of a program, transforming it so completely as to be unrecognizable, and employing it for a different purpose than the source where you got it from, you're probably not infringing. So an example of how this might play out would be, for example, a famous pop song being kind of parodied on Saturday Night Live. They're not even changing it so much. Like, the point of it is that they want you to recognize it, but they're putting it out not to go out in the world and compete on the radio with the song by the original creator, but instead to put it out there for critique and a statement about the culture. But if you're in a business coaching program and you're taking those principles out, reworking them, repackaging them, and then going out and selling them back to the coaching marketplace, you are not doing that in a way that's transformative and non-competing. It may be slightly transformative, but it's definitely competing in the same marketplace for the same purpose, and that makes it a problem. So I will have you put any questions you have about that in the chat, and I'll kind of come back, but I want to keep touching on these high-level points. So let me just orient us again. We talked about the fact that there's a lot of people out there doing the wrong thing. So just because it's being done widely doesn't mean that it's okay as far as using other people's content. The second thing is that if you did not buy the material for the purpose that you're using it for, it's not okay. And the third thing is that the ideas are not protectable. So the idea of automated lead flow is not a protected idea, but your own coach's expression of that idea through the modules they create, the principles that they teach you, the worksheets they might give you, that is protected. And I assure you that when you're buying access to a group coaching program, you are probably not getting permission to reteach that material. Instead, all you're buying is permission to apply it in your own life or business. So this brings me to kind of a couple of other points. If you are a person who's experiencing this, where people are learning from you and then going out and incorporating your work into their work, or even just like wholesale reteaching what you're teaching, I really encourage you to put some practical protections into your sales process to just normalize talking about this and let people know, because a lot of times it is innocent and everyone's doing it, so no one's thinking it's wrong, even though it is. So what I have started doing on my own sales pages is right below the Buy Now button, I have a little statement, friendly, no legalese. It just says, if you're another lawyer Or if you want to use this with your own coaching clients, or you want to share this with a friend, click here for licensing options. And I do that to just put it right out there for people that if you're going to click the buy now button, this is just for your personal use. And that's reflected in my contract. But I'm also putting right front and center in a really approachable way, just a notice like, hey, the buy now button is not for these other purposes. This isn't for lawyers who want to sell their own templates and want to copy mine. This isn't for people who run a group coaching program and want to give my templates to all the people in there. This isn't for people who want to like split the cost of one package with a friend, but they're both using it. That's not what this is for, but I do have those options available. And I encourage you to also make those options available. And a lot of times I'll tell that to coaches and they'll say, but I don't really want to do that. I don't want to white label my work. And my answer to that is not having the option available means someone's going to do it anyway. So you may as well have the option available, have them reach out to you for the conversation, and you can tell them at that point, like, it's either a price point that doesn't make sense, or you can't wholesale take all of the stuff that you want, and then they may go a separate way. So that's just number one. The second thing is, if you're a business coach, I highly encourage you to think about having a certification program. That's true for other types of coaching as well, but it seems like business coaching is really particularly suffering from this issue. So having a certification program available is a way to not only have a very high ticket item where you can make sure that the material is being taught in a way that they can appropriately go out in the marketplace and make sure they're not like, delivering bad work. It maintains the integrity of what you've created at least. It's also a very high ticket item that sells for much more than just direct client work or a group program. So if you have questions about that, I may end up running a separate workshop on certifications and courses and how important those are for coaches. But for right now, the bigger point is that to have an option for those people who do want to be like you and do want to reteach your work, you'll want to create white label options or licensing or certification so that you can get paid for that work and also maintain control over it in the marketplace. The other thing though is normalizing the conversation. So I encourage you under your buy now buttons to just have like somewhere for people to reach out. Now, if somebody bypasses that message and still hits buy now and uses the material for in the wrong ways or for purposes that are not allowed, you've also built kind of a trap. You can show a court, let's say, like they had to actually bypass this statement. They purposefully knew that they were purchasing something for one purpose, but ended up using it for another. And that's really important to be able to show that intent. So if there's one takeaway from today, I hope there's more, but if there's like one action step, I would go to your sales pages and your order forms today and add that language about, if you want to use it for XYZ purpose, click here and we'll have a conversation. All right. Now on the other side of this, if you're a person who's thinking like, oh my gosh, I'm reteaching all kinds of other people's material, there are a couple of myths floating around about why this may be okay. First and foremost, though, you have to understand that when it comes to copyright infringement, and that's what we're talking about is copyright, using other people's content, there's no good faith defense. There's just not. And there are also minimum statutory penalties. So the law kind of sets a minimum financial amount. So in that instance, people go out and they go, well, but I'm using it for an educational purpose, or I'm not ripping off the whole thing. In fact, I'm giving attribution and I'm only using a quote or, this one little exercise I learned. And just let me say it very unequivocally that there are exceptions. We call them fair use of other people's material, but they almost never apply in a business setting. They only apply for journalists, for educational institutions, and even though so many of us in the delivery of the work that we do in the coaching industry is educational, it is not the type of educational setting that the law allows an exemption for. Maybe that will change someday, but right now those exemptions don't apply. So, hi Stephanie. I do see some questions popping up, so I just want to make a couple more points and then I will get to those. The thing about using other people's work is it's not about just changing a couple of things. It's not about it necessarily being identifiable or not from the source. You really have to be coming into your content creation from the standpoint of originality, unless you are paying for white labeling or licensing or certification. So let's see. I just want to make sure I've covered the couple of points. Let me also say this before I get into the questions. There are a lot of ways that this show up that I haven't already talked about. One thing that I'm seeing very commonly, I'm in a program that's like this, and I see a ton of programs coming out like this where it's a group setting and people can submit work for critique, and that critique is public. So you have all the people in the group who can go and see the work that you are working on. It sounds like crazy as I'm saying it, but it's a really common thing. And the idea behind it is that it's an educational opportunity for everybody to see the critiques. But I know coming out of these groups that people's stuff is getting ripped off by other group members. And that's a huge problem for the person leading the group. I mentioned it, I think, in another live stream I did, but if you're doing any kind of critiques, I really encourage you to take those private so that you are not getting in the middle of any kind of infringement situations that are there. Another area that this is showing up is a lot of screenshotting. So we all want to be active on social media. I'm not, like, pretty much at all except for these live streams, but you know, I see people that they're paying to go to events, they're paying to go to trainings, and they're screenshotting and putting in their Instagram stories. They're, you know, doing live streams after the fact, like, these are the exact things I learned and the takeaways that I had. And so you're taking what used to be inside of a paid container and you're making it public. And on one hand, you know, your experience of the material is something that you own, but the screenshots of someone else's material, you don't own the screenshots. Another area that this comes up a lot with coaches is wanting to run group programs based on the principles of certain books. And you know, Profit First is a big one. People want to run like group coaching programs on Profit First without getting any kind of licensing or permission. And Profit First does have a certification and licensing program. So food for thought if that's something that you are doing or are thinking about doing. Another area it comes up is using personal photos that, you know, you hired a photographer for commercial use. And I've seen this come up with parenting coaches who are using their own like newborn photos, but you did not buy a license for those newborn photos to be used for commercial purposes. Same with wedding. I have a wedding planner who is using her own wedding photos in her wedding planning work. That's not what the license was for. And I know it can feel very like absurd, like these are my, like, it's my face in these wedding photos, why can't I use them? But that is again where the whole concept of intellectual property is not a common sense area, and you have to be so careful because there are some minimum penalties. And nowadays it's so easy to be able to find infringing material. You can upload images to the Google image search and it will search the web for all the instances of those photos. You can use services like Grammarly and some others that are really meant to make sure your text is understandable and grammatically correct, but it'll also go out and search the web to see if it is plagiarism from other sources. I do want to say a word on plagiarism because people will say to me, but I'm giving attribution, you know, like I'm showing this diagram from my coach and saying this is where it came from. Plagiarism is different than infringement. So giving attribution at least alleviates the issue of plagiarism. You are telling the reader, hey, I didn't create this. It didn't come from me. You're not taking credit as if it is yours, which is good. But also that still doesn't address this separate issue of whether you have permission to be showing it in the first place. And that's where the infringement thing happens. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. And then finally, the other place that this kind of shows up is not in the innocent setting. I cannot tell you guys, it is heartbreaking how many of my clients have come to me and said, look at this person, they totally ripped off my sales page. I had an entire self-liquidating offer get ripped off by one of my clients came to me about it. Sales pages, whole frameworks from a design program. I've had one client in particular, her stuff is amazing, so of course it's generating copycats, but they're like changing one word in her program name and then using her public facing sales page, total rip off of the copy, just swapping out colors and names. I mean, it's dead on, no qualms about doing it. And when she's reached out, they're like, oh, well, a copywriter did it, or my team did it. And that's where I'm saying, like, there's no good faith defense. You can't put it on someone else. So you've really got to understand. You've really got to understand and come from the perspective of creating original things. This topic, as I mentioned, I have thought about doing it before, but it's, of all the topics I talk about, I think this is legitimately the most scariest one. And so I wanted to come at it in a way where it opens your eyes to what the right and wrong things are and the seriousness of getting this wrong. But also, it's a heavy topic. Like, I feel heavy delivering it. So I hope through the question and answer, we can get some more examples and make you feel comfortable and confident as you leave here today. So I'm going to switch over to the comments and questions, and we'll go through it. Okay. Someone said, I question the ethics of using PLR content. Can you elaborate your thoughts on that? It's something that bothers me in the context of knowledge management. So many Me Too's that I question the authority of whoever created it, if they're a true expert. Yeah, so as we talk about a lot on my legal topics, there are the legal pieces of this, but then there are the best business practices. And so for anybody who has gotten on the phone with a client or a prospect, I should say, and the prospect is just really not sure if they should go forward, but they kind of can't articulate the reason. A lot of times it's because they have been burned. I mean, you don't have to go very far in the coaching industry, unfortunately, to know that there are copycats and people out there who are ruining it kind of for all of the rest of us who are trying to do the right thing. So my issue with like the white labeling of content is, even if you do it right, at the end of the day, the fact that you didn't create it yourself and you're reselling it is not usually going to be at the forefront of your marketing messaging. And so it makes sense that a client would feel, if they discover that, like, wait a second, I wouldn't have bought it from you. I would have wanted to get it from the source. That's a big issue in the coaching industry. So one thing I would encourage you, especially if you're a newer coach and you don't have your own methodologies developed yet, or you are heavily influenced by others, is to be clear in your marketing that you're along for support on someone's journey, and you're not just focusing on getting them some kind of outcome that maybe you haven't yet gotten. That's a way to keep it kind of ethical without having to have a whole bunch of unique content built out or methodologies built out that you just don't have yet by virtue of being new. Someone else said, I've seen content that's very similar to mine. In fact, read a book once that was exactly what I'd been creating. How to address that? This is a great question, and it brings one more complicating factor into the whole conversation. So I'm going to switch over to program names just for a second. The law takes the presumption with a name that the first person who came up with the name is it. It could have only been a light bulb moment one time, and anyone else who ever uses it is infringing on that person, so long as they took steps to protect it. But that's a conversation for a different day. But I want to give you that context to show you, by contrast, when it comes to content, the law takes the opposite approach. It says more than one person in more than one place at more than one time could have come up with the exact same, like, haiku poem, for example. Two people could have taken the exact same photo of the exact same sunset. In other words, the expression of ideas can be duplicate without one person having infringed on another. We could have a whole separate seminar on all the reasons for the policy reasons and the societal choices we've made to come up with those two things. But suffice it to say, for our conversation, we just need to know that that's the paradigm. So if you are out there seeing material that is similar to yours, that doesn't necessarily indicate that someone ripped you off. But if it's material that's similar to yours and it's someone who came after you, who's in the same industry as you, who's maybe a client of yours, maybe someone who's on your email list, someone that you've met, someone who would have reason to have looked at your stuff and copied it, then you can start going into the analysis of what proof do I have that this person saw me first and then created their thing. Because if they didn't see you first and happen to have come up with something that's similar, that's probably protectable. There's this element of having to show that they saw your work and copied it. And just because there's something similar out in the world, it doesn't necessarily follow. You need something else. So I hope that kind of answers the question of how to address it, is you've got to make sure, in short, that it's actually someone copying and not just a coincidence, because the law does protect coincidences. Someone said, what if I give the person credit like Brene Brown says? Yeah, so that addresses this attribution issue. And, doing a Brene Brown quote is one thing. Taking all of Brene's work on resilience and creating a program off of it, that's another thing. So there's a difference between attribution and just posting a quote on Instagram that provides attribution. Someone said, can you speak about citing sources ethically and how to recount a particular experience or exercise idea? So I'm going to have, whoever wrote that, will you kind of reframe the question for me in the comments, how to recount a particular experience or exercise idea, just to give me some clarification. As far as citing sources ethically, it's, I want you to cite the source, of course, because at least then it's not plagiarism, but you need to go the extra step. And if you're quoting somebody or reteaching their work, you need to go out and make sure you have permission. So you need to contact them about that. Someone said, would you recommend a license disclosure on systems I have created that I gift to others? Yes, I would, because you may be gifting it to someone, but it's not their right to then go out and package it up and resell it or re-gift it or reteach it. So you can definitely do that. So examples of that, like Creative Commons license is one that they're saying hey, this is an open license, but there are still some limitations on it, and you're welcome to do exactly the same thing. And so what you also have to understand is when you are a creator of something, you hold a bundle of sticks. That's what we learn in law school. And the sticks are all the different rights that you have, but you hold all the rights. But you may hand someone a stick to reteach this particular material. You may hand someone a stick that lets them reproduce an image a certain number of times for a specific purpose. But unless you specifically granted someone the stick, they don't have any rights to use that material. So if you're on the receiving end of that, you're in a group coaching program, you received a stick that allows you to view the material for personal use. Even though the contract may say nothing else, the creator of that group program holds all of the rest of the sticks. So this is how people get into thinking, well, nobody said I couldn't reteach it. They don't have to say it. The law presumes that the creator has all the rights unless they've specifically been dished out to other people. Okay, so someone says, how do you enforce it if someone does take your written expression or materials? To do this, once you're sure that it is a copy, you would start with a cease and desist letter. And most coaches right now are not registering the copyright for their material, but I encourage you all to start doing that. It's a pretty simple process and it's very inexpensive. It's much less than trademarks and much less complicated. Because if the person does not end up responding to the cease and desist letter, refuses to take it down, you can't sue them to stop without the registration. And so then you're stuck in this position of having to do an emergency registration. It's $750 if the Copyright Office will even grant it to you. So you need to be taking some proactive steps, including registering your best material, including really good language in your contracts. I'll talk a little bit about what my templates say on these topics. But if you can really clearly show that this person saw your work and copied it, you would also be able to go to whatever platform they're on and make a copyright infringement takedown request. That it gets into more complication, but in general, you either have to go to the web host, you've got to go to court, or you've got to go to the person directly. So some combination of those things is how you would enforce your rights. Someone says, can you use a link to a free online assessment so your client has knowledge of their label to then apply in a related exercise inside of your program? The online assessment's free. You're not charging for the assessment, just having the client's knowledge. It's going to depend. If you go to the license agreement on the free assessment or whatever terms and conditions they have, it may speak to that. If they don't have it, and you've got to assume that you can't actually do it, because not only are you using their categorization, but probably there's a name associated with it. Like I could see you saying, in my group program, I'm going to help you overcome communication issues with your team. So go out and take a DISC assessment or go out and take a Myers-Briggs. And this is probably shocking to you because so many people are doing that. But those are, the Gallup Strengths Assessment, those are all protected assessments. Now, there is an argument, like, for example, with Enneagram, Human Design is another one that they kind of never protected their material. And so they send out nasty letters, the Human Design especially, telling people, like, you can't use the phrase Human Design, you can't use generator and all of those things. I'm sorry, I'm so bad with Human Design types, but you all are probably familiar, you know what I'm talking about. So they are now trying to catch up in protecting that material. So just food for thought. If you're going to be doing that, you should really be reaching out to those organizations and seeing that it's okay that you're incorporating those assessments. Someone said, would you say the fair use standard is the same for personal coaching as business coaching? Yes. So I use the business coaching example because it's really easy to come up with examples on how people are stealing the material of the coach and using it for the wrong reason. But undoubtedly, I am also getting life coaching clients who are coming and having people rip off their paradigms and their teaching. So I don't mean to say it can't happen in personal coaching and life coaching the same as in business coaching, because it can. But yes, the fair use standard is the same. It cannot be for a commercial purpose. Someone says, are you saying someone can hire a photographer to take pics of themselves and yet they don't have total ownership? Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. So the examples again would be if I hire a photographer for newborn photos and then I want to, and I share them with my parents and, my husband's parents and, they're just family photos. Great, that's fine. But if I become a famous parenting coach and I want to use one of those newborn photos on my book cover, no, I don't have the rights to do that. I would be infringing on the photographer's rights to that image. And when you have photos taken for your brand, will a work for hire agreement fix the problem? Yes and no. So that's kind of putting a couple of concepts together. What you really want is a clear license that grants to you the rights to use the image as you intend to use it. So if you intend to have a run of 100,000 hard copy books using these images, you need to, the best practice is to make sure that your agreement is clear that that's what you're going to do with it. But if you're talking about just having stuff created so that you have whatever rights that you want, work for hire could help. It's actually quite a complicated area of law. So I don't want to say you could just slap a work for hire statement into your agreements, but it's a good start at least. But really what work for hire is that the person going out and doing the work, the intention is that the buyer of the work, the person who commissioned the work is a better way to say it, is going to get the rights as if they were the ones who created it. So they have to be drafted a certain way. The compensation for it should match the level of rights that are being granted, but that is actually an option. So more to it than just the clause in the agreement, like I say, but that is one direction to go to try to cover all of the rights. Okay, let's see. Shar says, sorry guys, whenever I scroll, it jumps around. So I feel like there's some more comments at the end that I'm not quite seeing. Okay, I think those might be all. Oh, someone says I produce online events. Photographer took in meeting photos for use on client marketing. Should we have done an agreement? Yes. Yeah. It may be okay to try and do it after the fact or just clarify. But with photographers, you want to be really clear because, like I say, it's very easy for them to be able to see where the infringing images are appearing. All right. I see some more questions coming in. Let me wait another minute. While I'm waiting, I wanted to let you know that we have, I think, 2 more workshops coming up. Let me just double check. Yeah, okay, so we have protecting your program names and content. So we'll go more into exactly how to put practical and legal protections into place to make sure that, we can't totally prevent infringement of your own work, but there are some things that we can do to make it tough for people to infringe on you and just have them move right along to the next person who's going to be much easier to rip off from, unfortunately. And then June 14th, we're going to talk about pricing and packaging and how to decide your next offer. This will be a really fun one because I see inside of a lot of coaching businesses, and I think some of it will blow your mind. So that will be cool. Okay, let me go back to the last questions. Would directing a one-on-one client to take the Strengths Finder be an infringement? Is it different than a group coaching program or course? So recommending a resource is not going to be problematic. The problematic part is if you're saying, like, I have a program for people who are, I've done the Strengths Finder. I can't think of like what their results are, but whatever, let's say, a famous one Kendall Summerhawk puts out there is the brand archetypes, sacred brand archetypes, I think. And so she's got names that come out of there. So if you're saying, oh, go take Kendall's assessment, and then if you're a romantic and whatever, come back and do my romantic and whatever program, that's going to be where the problem is. But recommending resources is not in and of itself a problem. Let's see. I write an educational blog and use quotes cited within it. Any issue there? So if you are not a college professor or an educational institution, like a formal educational institution, then the fact that the blog is educational is not the type of educational thing to give us a fair use exception. It's still going to be considered commercial if it's in the context of a business that you're running that's for profit. So quoting people is not going to get you a cease and desist letter sent your way. If we see people doing quote accounts on Instagram, like all of that sort of thing. But if you're taking, a book that you're reading and you're quoting long passages that are competing with the book in the sense of this person is not going and getting the book because you just quoted the whole concept, that's where you're going to run into a problem. And I want to be careful because there was a myth going around a couple of years ago. People would be like, well, as long as it's 10 words or fewer, you're fine. And that is just malarkey. There's no hard and fast rule about that. So I think the bigger point here is to look at what the quote is for, how it relates to the context of what that person who said it sells versus what you're trying to ultimately sell, and just understanding that if you didn't create it and you didn't say it, you've got to be careful, and how much of it you're quoting will impact just how careful you need to be. Sharon says go back to number 4. I love it, Sharon. Okay. So that original question I asked you to clarify how to recount a particular experience or exercise idea, you said the attribution versus infringement discussion is helpful. My question about ethical citing would be for a particular personal coaching exercise, like quoting someone else's single writing prompt, not using all their work or system. Yeah, so doing if you're in a program and there's this great writing prompt, I know like one of my all-time favorites is from Byron Katie. Who would you be if you weren't thinking this thought? You can't do that. you can't go out and have that in your own program for sale on Mindset, without permission. But here's the thing, it's not impossible to get permission. It doesn't have to be this whole elaborate situation. Just like reach out to the person and see if it's something that's really transformational that your audience would benefit from. They will probably let you use it with attribution, because I think, going back to the common sense perspective, in some instances people realize, like, if my work is getting in front of your audience and your audience and your audience, that's ultimately building brand equity for myself. So you don't want people totally ripping it off, but directing people back. I think most coaches would be okay with that concept. So I hate to be the bearer of bad news. Like, I hate talking about this topic because I feel so bad to be delivering this news. So Dorita, I shall not confirm or deny if this applies. I'll just do better. Yes, no judgment today. Okay, Lowcat, I have an idea for a coaching name that doesn't seem to be trademarked. I see 2 people using it already. Is this okay? Maybe or maybe not. I'm going to come back to that question in just a second. Let me make a note about it. This is so helpful. Thank you for generosity. You're welcome. Joy says, is there a difference between saying it off the top of your head instead of in print, e.g. Katie Byron? So no. Being caught in writing is much easier, though, like from a practical standpoint. So that's a good example. Like, I just gave you that quote from Byron Katie, and I am telling you can't quote from people, and I just did it. The big difference here is that I'm using it not in a mindset coaching program. Like, I'm not going into the marketplace to compete with her using her expression of this idea. And I know that seems like hair splitting, but that is the way to think about it. Barb says, hi Barb, by the way, how would someone prove that you're using their content? It's really likely I could use an almost identical. Yeah, so Barb, I don't know if you were here from earlier, but that is the burden of the creator, is to show that this person actually did infringe and just didn't have this separate concept on their own. And that's also why the idea itself is not protectable. It's the expression of the idea. So the Darwin's theory of evolution example is the best way to frame that, carrying it over into like coaching and therapy, self-awareness, holding space, active listening, those are concepts that are not protectable. People all over the place could use that. People all over the place have come up with that. But if you're writing out the 10 key attributes of an active listener, and then those 10 key attributes are being put out into the marketplace and other competing programs, that's where the problem is. But the creator would still have to show that you somehow came across their material first and then incorporated it or copied it into their own material. So the more general the subject matter, the less protection it's going to get. And that's true also of the more nonfiction the subject matter, the less protection it's going to get. So it's a complicated area, which is another reason why it's hard to talk about it. So we have to always go back to that rule of thumb of, if you're seeing something that you didn't pay to use for a certain purpose and that you yourself didn't create, you've got to press the pause button on how you're going to use that in your own commercial programs as well. Someone said, I've been branding myself for years but have never copyrighted it. Now that I'm online virtual, how do I protect it? I've already gotten wind of others who may be using it after commenting that they liked it. Yeah, so there is, this is kind of where we get into the best business practices thing. I'm not saying that every blog post, every social media post that you put out there, you need to go and spend $40 or $50 to register the copyright. I mean, practically speaking, I think perhaps there could come a point in your brand's evolution where it makes sense to do that from a financial standpoint. But what I like to focus on with my clients are their most important pieces of content, like the things that are really their signature, that are the most unique, that are the most central to whatever methodology it is that they have created. Now, with some clients, their absolute best work is really not kind of in writing in some sort of course. It might be that it's really for one-on-one clients only. So it's a limited audience who's seeing it. It's behind a pretty hefty paywall. So that's not the material we focus on protecting, actually. We focus on something that is a little more financially accessible. More people are going to see it. And it's kind of the gateway of someone coming into their world and starting to see what they're all about. So a really good kind of example of this is with the Life Coach School. For those of you who are familiar, Brooke Castillo uses the model: circumstances, thoughts, feelings, actions, results. And it's all over her podcast. You know, she talks about people using it in their personal life just after listening to the podcast. But I've looked at her certification agreement, and you cannot go out and coach other people using that. You know, that would be infringement of her material, even though it's very publicly available. Just the fact that it's out there doesn't mean it's enough that it's up for the taking. So I would look at what content you have that's the most important. Go out and get that registered. And then, Susan, you should probably have more of a conversation with your audience or the people who are using it, who've liked it, to let them know. You know, there's a way that's friendly-ish to reach out and say, I know it's really common, but it doesn't make it right. And really, you can't be taking this stuff for your own commercial use. So I want to kind of come back to Barb's question here. Yeah, so Barb says, it's really likely I could have used an almost identical quote, but I have no idea who this person is. And that wouldn't be infringing if you thought of that material yourself. Someone says, Christopher says, oh no, I lost the question. This is a CBT approach. Sharon, will you copy that one over for me? If you see it, I may have just saw something earlier in the conversation as I'm scrolling. All right, guys, if that question, I'll scroll through it when I get back on my laptop. I want to end it here because I know this one was kind of a long one. So I want to do a quick recap again. If you didn't create it, you've got to go out and get permission, which could mean just sending out a request to the person who created it and or going through a formal licensing or certification process. That's number one. The second thing is that ideas are not protectable. And more than one person could have come up with the same idea. It's the expression of the idea that is protected. And so this is where we can't be quoting heavily from books. We can't be taking writing prompts out of someone else's program. And that coaching is not the type of educational exception that allows us to fairly quote or invoke what we call the fair use exceptions. Photographers have all the rights to their images. So if you're using images that you're not sure about, I encourage you to get that cleaned up ASAP. The statutory penalties are really high for that. And I also finally encourage you to have your own options and go out and next to your buy now buttons, put a sentence there that says, if you plan to use it for any of these other purposes that you don't want people using them for, click here to have a licensing conversation. This way you at least bring the attention to the forefront, because what I've struggled with as an attorney is being that's very complicated area, as you've heard me talk about for almost the last hour. It's a very fine line kind of area. That means it's also very expensive. It can be very expensive to enforce your rights. And yes, there are legal protections like a copyright registration, but I think as an industry, we have to do better to, first of all, normalize the conversation about it. That could be in your welcome video, just giving everyone a friendly reminder that the past they've purchased is for their own personal use. And if they want to reteach it or incorporate your materials, please reach out. Just get the conversation happening to bring the awareness. But I would also love to create some kind of pledge or stamp that are, we're abiding by, that you can be assured when you're buying my stuff, it's original. It's not just a regurgitation. I think that one would hit a lot of people where it hurts. So I don't know if so many people would be willing to adopt a pledge like that. But I definitely am open to having more of a conversation about this, because even 2 or 3 years ago, it was only the big people getting ripped off. But I am seeing people that are not internet famous by any stretch of the imagination who their stuff is getting ripped off. And a lot of times it's happening where they have a deep area of expertise with a certain niche, and then someone who's a really great marketer comes along and they're like, there's an opportunity here. And so they take this material and they can just put it on blast because they have this amazing marketing technique. So it's just about the dirtiest thing you could do to somebody, but it is happening out there. So let's see. Someone says, oh, the model. This is a CBT approach, thoughts, feelings, actions, outcomes. So because she used it first, I can't. No, it's not saying that you can't use it. It's saying that if you've never heard of it before and you come across it from Brooke, you cannot go out and create a program on the basis of her teachings, like the way that she expresses it as the model. So you couldn't go out to your audience and say, I teach a coaching methodology called the model. No, she does own that. But I get what you're saying, that she did not come up with the idea of thoughts creating feelings. So that's where we go back to this concept with copyright, that multiple people can have the same idea and they can express it in the same way and it can be coincidental. It's when someone goes out with the intent to take from a person that they've just discovered and express the ideas in the same way and pass it off as their own. All right, I don't think I'm seeing any other questions at the moment. For those of you who catch us on the replay, just make sure you tag me because my notifications kind of get lost on these videos. I'll send out the replay today once I upload it to YouTube, and I'll see you back here on the 10th. We're going to have a little lighter conversation about the trademarks and copyrights. Oh, that reminds me, someone asked a question about the trademark. I'm going to post a separate response in the group about that because it's a little bit off topic from today and I don't want to take too much time explaining why it's different, but definitely come back on the 10th and I'll clarify even that post as well. All right, guys, I will talk to you next week. Have a great weekend.